So we did the movie Upstream Color, made in 2013 by myself, Logan, and Quentin. So this movie is about a parasite which goes through 3 life cycles. It goes from humans to pigs and then to orchids. At each stage of this cycle, there is someone who profits from it and then also someone who's harmed from it as well. They also unknowingly move the parasite to the next level in the story. There's 3 main characters which make this parasite move on. The first person is the thief. He is the one that when we saw in class, he's the first person we saw who was going to the dumpster throwing stuff out. He's the one who infects the victims by forcing the worms down their throat, and that's where they multiply and go through their bloodstream. This serves 2 functions. 1, it puts them in hypnotic trance, and 2, it absorbs their consciousness, making them more susceptible to command. To put them in more of a trance, he has them do pointless tasks. So for example, with Chris, the girl who we saw running in the beginning of the film, he makes her read or write down lines from Henry David's Walden, or A Life in the Woods, and then he makes her fold it in half and then make chains out of it. When we saw him walking to the dumpster, he had the chains leaking out of the bag before he threw it in. That's what she was making. And then once they're in a deep enough hypnosis, he makes them sell their possessions and then leaves them with nothing. He does this to Chris, and then he also does it to Jeff, who we'll meet later on in the story. The next person is the sampler. The sampler is the one who takes the victims and does a blood transfusion from the pigs that he has. The transfer of the worm establishes a connection between the victim and pig that they're never able to get away from. The sampler then uses these pigs. Getting close to them, he can see the person's experiences who are connected to them, and he plays sounds to the pigs, and this in turn makes them feel a certain way, which the humans that they're connected to makes them feel that way as well. So in this way, he's actually mimicking God and trying to play God. A new character is introduced at this time, and his name is Jeff. So for example, Chris feels undeniable connection to him that she can't really get away from. They don't really know why they're connected to each other. This is because their pigs were connected and they were making babies at that time, so they felt undeniably drawn to each other. So once they have the babies, the sampler, like the pigs have no use to him, so he drowns them and he throws them into a creek. And this leads us to our next character, which is the orchid farmers. Once the pigs are dead and the bodies are decomposing, the parasite leaches out of the pigs and it goes into the ground, and then the orchids grow off of that, turning them blue. Then they sell these through their company, E&P Exotics. So in the beginning of the film, when we saw him picking the grubs out of the plants, there was a label on E&P Exotics, so the cycle continues and it repeats. Now, Upstream Color is mainly about free will. At the end of the movie, Chris and Jeff both end up fighting back against the sampler, and they end up taking back control of their world again. This happens when Chris shoots the sampler and kills him. This symbolizes taking control of their destiny. He also uses the worms as a metaphor for any outside control. Throughout the whole film, they're constantly fighting against outside control, which would be the worms. Even when the worms were not in their bodies anymore, they're still fighting against it, and they're still trying to take back their lives from it. This movie is about loss and how we rebound when faced with such challenges. When Chris lost everything, she had to restart over completely. After getting fired from her job, from not going into work because she was in such a deep trance, then losing her apartment because that's what he stole from her, or losing her house. She put out a mortgage on it and lost about 30 grand. It is meant to talk about all the things that are not spoken about, but we know how it affects us, whether that would be religious beliefs, cosmic beliefs, or even hidden biological processes. All the things that make you ask questions like, why did I do that? Or why am I doing this tomorrow? Or maybe even, why does someone else think this way?
So there was obviously a lot of heavy use of surrealism in this film. It was mainly the psychic link that became present from the worms, the grubs. When the piglets were taken away from the pigs, she also felt that emotion of extreme loss, extreme depression, and it threw her into her kind of spiral into a huge mental breakdown, which leads her to killing the sampler, who she assumed was the thief and the cause of all her problems, because he was the person that she saw interacting with a pig, digging through the garbage. She assumed he was the one manipulating her, and because of this, her overwhelming emotions caused her to kill him, and it leads her just to be, leads her to a point where she just feels this complete not emotionlessness, but void, empty feeling, where she ends up swimming in her pool, resetting the lines from Walden that were used to put her in the trance from the first place.
This film heavily relies on intellectual montage. Practically every scene is connected to its adjacent scenes, and this concept of connection plays a huge role throughout this entire film. Many of these scenes feel fragmented, going back and forth between each other. However, this happens because it's associating one action to another, or associating a certain sound to an action. For instance, in the film, there is a big connection with the pig farmer getting sounds for sampling and using them to play through the speakers into the ground. In a subtle way, we can connect this with the main protagonist, who realizes this as well when she slides the rocks down the pipe underneath the bridge. Another scene would be when she's in the pool and she's saying the lines from the Walden books. They're wondering why she's saying those, so they look it up on Google. They find that it's actually from that Walden book, and this connects them to the same environment that the pig farmer was in, which connects them to the pig farmer, all the while going back and forth between scenes, showing you that.
Anyone have any questions?